insecurity. So in other words, if you are reviewing the business, tell staff you're reviewing the business, but don't create unnecessary scares in terms of what the outcome of that will be. So it needs to be a carefully managed process.
I mean, frequently staff will have many of the answers that you're looking for as well, because they're at the sharp end. They know well what way the customers are reacting, or where the products are being sold, or how the manufacturing is going, or whatever it is. So I mean, I would be in favour of involving staff, and of course you shouldn't be just starting out to involve them now because you've got challenges. I mean, the essence of involvement of staff is that you've been doing it all along.
Yeah, but John,
everyone has.
Yeah, but still, I mean, we had an example. It was an amazing example a few years ago where we were dealing with a client, a large organisation here in Dublin, and they took everybody away, and all the organisation, and said, we're thinking of doing some change around here, and sometime in around 6 months' time, maybe there'll be something like 200 redundancies, and then everyone went back to work. Except they didn't go back to work. They went back to the building, and no work was done for 6 months.
I mean, that's probably a classic example of how not to do it. What I'm arguing is that there is regular communication through team briefings or whatever with staff, and that if we have a context to raise issues about the business. But taking away people in a big group and saying to them there's going to be 20% of people made redundant, all you're doing is frightening everybody and scaring all the horses, and only maybe 5%, 10% are going to be affected in the end.
Okay.
So I think that's the wrong way.
Yeah, okay. We'll cover this whole notion of communication. Very interesting, and a lot of areas to be covered in there, a lot of vulnerability for companies in that as well. So we'll deal with that in a separate thing out here in a couple of weeks.
I know we're talking about change management. I know we're going to focus on change throughout this, and rightly so. But one of the things you've got to consider is business as usual. So while people are looking at change and planning change and dealing with the change program, somebody has to mind the business as well. Because the danger is, with all the focus on what we're going to do in the future, people forget about the day-to-day stuff, which pays the bills.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so somebody described that to me one time as it's like driving down the M50 at kind of 80 miles an hour and changing the engine at the same time, which you know, is some feat really.
You can't bring your organisation back to the garage and take it out of service for a week, you know, just to change it. Everything is happening simultaneously.
At the same time, and that's a big challenge. And maybe that's something obviously we're going to have a look at later on. We'll deal with it in some specific module that we're doing here. Okay, just to get back to that first thing, the strategic review, which is the first step we're talking about here. Now, the sort of things we have to take into account in doing that strategic review. Now, strategic review sounds big, and that's fine, you know, for large organisations, multinational, big PLCs or whatever. But you know, if you're a small, you know, small or medium-sized enterprise, right? I mean, strategic review might sound a bit grandiose, but it does mean you have to stop and look and take stock or whatever.
Yeah.
So just maybe the sort of things you need to take into account to make sure that bit is successful.
I think every business has its own measures of success. The KPIs, to use the business term, but it could be sales, revenues, costs, market share, product quality. So, you know, if you have a business plan, you should have at least 5 or 6 measures that at the end of the year will be an indication as to whether or not you've been successful or not in that year. And obviously these are the things you track and measure on a weekly or certainly on a monthly basis. So any review of your business would need to be a fully informed review of those key metrics, you know, in the context of the environment you're operating in. You can do a SWOT analysis, but I think if you have a management team come together, they need to have good quality information in terms of what's happening to sales, costs, profit margins, order books, what's happening in their environment, market share, all the key metrics that they would have for that business.
But Mick, we're talking about people, like you said there yourself, somebody's company turned around in 6 weeks from being a, you know, a good company to being a company that suddenly was in trouble. We don't have much time to get involved in what would be seen as, you know, a major analysis.
Yeah, I don't think it's a major analysis though. I mean, I think you can do this in a day. You know the business issues that you're facing, even if you spent an hour and a half doing a SWOT. And it's an old tool, but it works very well. Look at your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities and threats. You'll work it out very well. You know the hard realities, the KPIs, and how the business is going. The question is, where are we going to focus in the future? And have we the skills and competencies?
But in reality, John and Mick, in reality, when people go looking for this information to bring it around the table where this decision is going to be taken, is it there? Is it fresh? Is it up to date?
Well, you see, Peter, it's back to this conversation we had at the start. What is or isn't a successful change program? So what you'll find is that successful change programs will start with a good analysis of the business, so that the decision.
But is the information there? What I'm asking you is, though, is the information, because if the company's going down the Swanee, people may have taken the eye off the ball.
That's the information. That's the information. So we've got a challenge, and we've got to sit down and look at it, and we've got to take decisions.
Now, I have been in boardrooms and in management team meetings where there is a lack of good quality information. In other words, you can't make good decisions, and sometimes the process takes longer because people have to go away and say, we need more information. And that's, you know, you might be surprised to hear how often in certain instances that can happen.
And they're often at a stage now where tough decisions maybe have to be taken and taken quicker than previously, obviously.
Yeah.
Whereas before, when I use the analogy of everyone in a speedboat, looking at how fast we're going, looking at the wake of the boat and the big wave we're creating behind us, and aren't we doing fantastic? But nobody's looking up ahead and saying, hey, there's a 30-foot wave coming at us, or there's a cliff ahead. Yeah. So I think that's what the people need to look at now and say, what are the big challenges? Where are the trends? Can we spot them early enough? And can we be agile enough to shift? Because whatever your business is in, others are looking at that business as well, saying, is it changing and can we move?
Okay, so looking at the scope of this. So people say, we've got to do something here. And generally, at the moment, it's reactive, let's face it. Right? So people are saying, we've got to do something here. Sit down the analysis. The scope of that analysis, you're saying, Mick, is along, what are your KPIs? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Get those up, right?
What are your KPIs? I mean, to what extent, you obviously have targets. You might have targets in terms of revenues, profits, costs, to use simple financial metrics.
Yeah.
Chances are, if, in the current environment or in the environment that existed in the last 2 years, if you're tracking your actual versus target, you're seeing big gaps. And the question is, what do we do to bridge those gaps?
Okay, so in terms of that actual analysis process, we're talking to people today who are saying, okay, maybe we should sit down and do this.
Yeah.
Now, their accountant may come in and decide, let's have a chat, their solicitor may come in or whatever. But just looking at somebody who's saying from scratch.
I think you start from the business metrics first of all.
But who do you bring into the meeting? Who do you bring into the meeting?
You get the data. You need the data. You need the chief executive there.
Yeah.
And maybe you need some external help to facilitate it. But you need to say, where's this business going? So you need the people around the table first of all to say, okay, in 18 months' time, where do we expect to be? What do we want to be known for?
Or 6 months' time if we land.
What do we want to be known for by our customers? What do we want our staff to be saying? So get a view of where we're trying to get to, because change is about focusing on a vision and saying, okay, we don't know how we're going to get there, but that's where we're going to go. And working on that basis and saying, let's get there.
I think it's important that the management team make the decision, because when it comes to, we said already, the task of analysis, difficult though it may be, is easier than the task of implementation. And the role of the management team is key in implementation. So it's the people who make the decision will have to lead the implementation, and therefore a management team should be part of that decision.
And buy into it.
Yeah.
But I mean, we've seen it. I've seen it certainly, and you may well have seen it, where the analysis is done around the table here, and I've facilitated these, where you get even the body language of the guy that has his back half turned to what's going on, which really tells. And it's true. One I saw over in the last, say, 15 months, the guy shoulder back turned to the process. And left early, and he was the very person in the end who caused a major problem in the issue later on. He did not buy into the situation.
Sometimes you do have to, I mean, there's a saying, to change the people. Sometimes you have to change the people, and there maybe have to be consequences for some to leave.